Do you realize the impact that you have, or do you assume that the people around you treat you the way they do because of purely what they think of you? This is a blind spot that most of us have, and we don't realize we have it because we're so in our headspace about what we think everyone else thinks of us, or what we need them to think of us, and what we want them to see in us, and all of that, that we don't realize that we actually have impact. And if there's one thing that causes a lot of regret later in life, is that we come to realize later on what impact we had that influenced the experiences that we actually experienced at the hands of others. And this is especially true if we're the influential in that space without realizing that we're influential. And when we don't realize that we're influential, we then try desperately to be more influential, and that's how we end up overreaching and overacting and over emphasizing things that become an annoyance and almost repulsive sometimes to others. So our recognition of the impact that we have is a very difficult thing to pin down, because it's rarely something that you can determine in the moment. The only thing you can do is in the moment is recognize what is the effectiveness of how it is that you're coming across. And that requires mindfulness. And mindfulness, as we know, people struggle with it. And people are still trying to chase mindfulness as if it's something you can actively practice. You can't. You can't actively practice mindfulness, because that in itself distracts you from what you should be focusing about, or what you should be focusing on. So mindfulness is the absence of distraction. The absence of distraction then means that you can't have your head cluttered and overthinking and looking for signals and signs and risks and threats, while you're supposed to be focusing on what is actually happening in that moment. Which then begs the question, what makes it possible for you to focus like that without being distracted by what's going on in the back of your mind, or what happened the last time you experienced something like that? And that's where we keep spiraling and rabbit holing and going in all sorts of directions, except the direction in which we actually should be going in. So when we want to see what impact we have, we should look at how others feel about what we do, how they feel about what we say, or how they feel about the way we say things. Because that's something that we always blame them for. Why are you so sensitive? Why are you like this and why are you like that? It's because we have impact. Because we impact them a certain way, because they need a certain thing from us in the same way that we need something from them. But that apprehensiveness that comes up, that builds up in us when we realize what someone expects from us or needs from us, that's what causes us to lose sight of the impact we have, because then we want to focus on managing their expectation. And we don't manage their expectation by speaking nicely and explaining expectations and explaining to them why it is that they mustn't expect this or expect that from us. We manage expectations by how it is that we create space for them. If we want someone to have higher expectations of us because we want to be that much more significant to them, then we'll create a lot of space for them. Then we're all over the place, bending over backwards, wanting to be of service, wanting to go the extra mile, and all of those horrible cliches. And we literally get to the point where we might even make ourselves available as a doormat for them. All because we want to have that space in their life. Now, what happens if you don't realize that you're doing this with almost everyone you meet? You then end up feeling completely depleted, deflated, depressed, because you're always trying so hard and no one's trying so hard for you. Why is it that we always need to do so much for others but no one's doing as much for us? That's where we tend to lose ourselves, because we don't realize the impact we have, or we're not willing to allow people to experience that impact because we're so fixated on serving and trying to be enough. And then we blame them. We blame them for not appreciating us. We blame them for not seeing us, for not understanding what's important to us. Meanwhile, we're caught in our own heads. Now, what happens, can you imagine, rather, what happens when you've got two people in a relationship where both of them undermine or underestimate the impact that they have on each other? It's crazy, because what you're going to end up with is constant bickering, constant arguing, constant fighting. And the fighting part, the arguing and the anger, that's the craziest part of it all. Because think about this, right? I've often said, and I maintain this, that anger is a defense mechanism. Anger is not an emotion in itself. Anger is a response to the emotion. So if we feel as if we're being treated unfairly, as if we're being treated as if we're invisible or irrelevant, and it's about a space or something or in a setting that is important to us, then we'll get angry if we don't feel confident about being able to sway the way it is that we're being treated, change it, influence it, or claim our space. And when it comes to that, if you take that anger thinking a bit further, you'll realize that anger, if it's a defense mechanism, it means we're feeling attacked. It means that we're feeling undermined. So if we're feeling undermined and we now get angry because we want to demand that they take us more seriously, that they respect us, that they treat us with significance, anger then, that demand for significance, is going at someone who in turn is demanding significance from us. Doesn't make sense, does it? Because when two people are screaming at each other, they're both demanding to be taken seriously. So who gives in first? The person with a healthier self-esteem. But if both of them are out of touch with their self-esteem, it's not going to break down anytime soon. The only thing that will break that cycle is who has more power, authority, who has more resources that can threaten consequences if it doesn't stop. And that is the unhealthiest way to resolve anything, because all that does is it beats someone into submission. And the power and authority and resources that we have is not necessarily in terms of like global politics and wealth definitions and classism and all of that. It's also about what it is, what operating system, my days in IT are starting to show. Not operating system, what setting, what cultural norms and what frames of reference do we operate within? So in a traditional household where it might be patriarchal by nature, then the power and authority we have is to demand that you will do it because I am the man of this house. Or if it's a matriarchal environment, then it's I am the queen of the castle, so you're going to listen to me as well. The point is that what we draw on to establish that power and authority that we have over others is a reflection of what we think of ourselves. And it's a reflection of what it is that we believe is required to be able to get people to take us more seriously or to see us differently. And that is quite revealing. Because if you want to see yourself more clearly and you want to realize what impact you have versus what impact you would want to have, that's the kind of clarity you need. You need that clarity of perspective and reflection on your own behavior and your own why that drives you to do what you do or the way you do what you do. You have to have more clarity on that. Otherwise, if you don't have the clarity, what you're going to do is you're going to interpret how other people respond to you as being what they think of you, which means that that's how you're appearing. Or if that's not how you're appearing, you don't know how to get them to take you more seriously. So then you resort to bullish tactics, where you'll draw on power and resources and authority to be able to establish your position. Or you'll blackmail. You'll emotionally blackmail people. You'll guilt them into things. You'll be passive aggressive. All forms of anger as well. So coming back to the impact that we have. The impact that we have is how we see ourselves affecting others. And it might be that they are distracted. But if we are equally distracted, we're not going to see that our impact on them is provoking their fears, provoking their sense of inadequacy even. Because that's the other thing that plays out a lot in relationships, especially in marriage, is that because we need to be enough, we might not be aware of why we're not enough. And then when we see that we're treated as if we're not enough, we believe that we're inadequate, or we believe that the other person sees us as inadequate. And it's all distractions. It's literally smoke and mirrors most of the time, because what you end up doing is you end up trying to posture differently. You end up trying to appear differently, but you don't focus on the substance. What is it that's giving them reason to see you that way? Or what is it that's giving them reason to respond in the way that they do? That's by realizing that you are accountable for the accuracy of what you're communicating to others. If you are trying to get someone to be inspired by something that you're advising them about, and you see they're getting their backs up, and you see they're getting all sensitive and defensive, then you need to realize that what you're intending is not being received the way you intend it to be received. Now, you can either take offense to that because you feel inadequate and you feel incompetent, so now you need to protect yourself from that, because it can't be me. I'm telling you that I'm trying to inspire you. What's wrong with you? Or you can recognize that where that person is at, they're not receiving it as inspiration, they're receiving it as criticism. They're not receiving it as advice, as sincere advice to uplift them. They're receiving it as critical feedback that is pushing them down, that is exposing their weakness, their vulnerabilities. And that's again another thing that happens, is that when we're beating ourselves up about something, if someone gives us advice on that and we're not in a healthy space with our self-worth, that advice will come across as if they're trying to poke at what it is that we're already insecure about. And that insecurity is ours to own. I always say your triggers are yours to own, your insecurities are yours to own. Yes, when you get into hopefully a healthy relationship, then you can expect each other, or you can at least find a balance where you support each other in working through and creating space for building on your abilities and your self-esteem and all of that, so that those insecurities can be dealt with and overcome. But that doesn't mean that someone else is responsible for doing that. It doesn't mean it's your right to have others tiptoe around your sensitivities and your triggers and your insecurities, because that is a reflection of how much value they place on your experiences in their life. And if you're going to dictate that they have to, all you're doing is you're getting compliance. You're not getting sensitivity. You're not getting empathy or compassion or understanding or accommodation. You are getting compliance. So if you demand to be taken seriously through anger, you'll be taken seriously only because there's a fear of the consequences of not taking you seriously. It's not because they actually respect what you're saying or what you're doing. And the same thing in return. If you take someone else seriously because you're afraid of the authority that they have over you and what it is that they can cause as a negative consequence or an unpleasant outcome in your life, then you're not being true to yourself, because you're not seeing them for who they are. You're seeing them for the authority that they wield. And that's how we create dictators and authoritarians, because they have good reason to believe that their authority will go unchallenged. And this plays out we can see it playing out in the global stage at the moment, where we respect the office that someone occupies, despite the person in office being a buffoon. And that's what happens when you don't have a healthy self-esteem. When you don't have a healthy self-esteem, you honor your place in the structure that you're operating in, because that's the only way you believe you're going to get respect or significance. And that plays out in all sorts of ways. It plays out in every domain of your life. It plays out at work, it plays out at home, it plays out in your social structures, it plays out politically, it plays out in the public space, in your advocacy, if you are into any advocacy efforts as well. And it plays out across the board. But if you're not aware of how it's playing out, you'll keep looking for the space that receives you best, and then you'll start applying yourself to that, and you'll think, this is my tribe, or this is my space, or this is where I can be most effective. And it's not necessarily going to be the thing that really fulfills you. And that's how you can end up exerting yourself for years and years, if not decades, on doing something or pursuing a career or pursuing a certain path, only to realize later on that this is just not hitting the spot. It's just not giving me that fulfillment in life that I was hoping to achieve. And that's what escapes us, is fulfillment. Fulfillment, composure, contentment. All of that just becomes elusive. It becomes difficult to put a finger on or to even grasp when we're driven by how we need others to see us. And for us to shift from that, we have to trust that we do the right thing for the right reasons in the best way we can, and we're open to consistently revising and improving and being more effective at understanding how to achieve it. We focus on that, and we trust that whoever is equally invested in what's important to us, they will then treat it with due respect and due consideration and appreciation. But we don't trust that, because the fear of being inadequate and the fear of not being enough, or the fear of being incompetent or being excluded, those fears prevent us from trust. And that's why most people struggle. In fact, I think it's fair to say that almost all people struggle in relationships because they don't trust. And then when we look at trust as a contract, as an agreement between two people, as a commitment that someone made and they must now honor that commitment, that's only one small dimension of trust. But if that becomes the entirety of the focus of the trust of the relationship, we end up with all sorts of problems again, because you then end up in a transactional relationship. And it sounds like life is complicated, right? But it's not. The reason it's complicated is because we lose sight of the impact that we have. We lose sight of what it is that the place we occupy in someone else's life, what it means to them, not what it means to us. So a child might not see how it is that their well-being has a massive impact on how their parents feel. So when they don't take care of themselves, or they make themselves available to stupid behavior or reckless behavior, or they behave in a way that is flippant or undignified, they don't realize what impact it has on their parents. So when they see their parents correcting them or taking steps to prevent them from exposing themselves to harm, they see it as trying to control. You're being so old school, you're being so authoritarian and all of that nonsense. Meanwhile, they don't realize that there is a deep concern for their well-being that is driving the reaction from their parents. Taking the reverse context, if the parents don't realize what impact they have on their children, they're going to constantly be petty and controlling and niggly about every small thing that their children do, because they want to be sure that their children are respecting them. And again, you lose trust in the process, because they didn't understand or appreciate what impact they have on their children. And if you feel seen and heard, whether you're a parent or a child, an adult or a kid, it doesn't make a difference. If you feel seen and heard, you'll get your best behavior. You'll get the best demeanor coming out. Now, I'm not saying that just because you see and hear someone else that they're going to feel seen and heard. Because remember, your distraction is your internal conversation. It's how you see yourself. It's what you're looking for as signs to indicate that you're being taken seriously, not necessarily what someone else is doing. And that's why mindfulness, again, is so critically important, because without mindfulness, without being in the moment, you come up with all sorts of narratives that convinces you that you're right about something. Meanwhile, you're missing a whole lot of information that is available, but you're just blind to it because that's not what you're looking for. You know, it's that red car theory all over again. If you're driving down the road and you're looking for red cars, you'll see red cars. And if I ask you if there were any blue cars or green cars on the road, you'll say no. It doesn't mean that blue or green cars didn't exist. It just means that you didn't register it when they did come across your path, because you weren't looking for them. Ask you how many white cars there are on the road, you'll probably not bother, because white doesn't really attract your attention. But ask you how many red cars there are on the road, you'll be able to count how many you saw because you were focusing on the red cars. Same thing here. If I ask you, what do you think people think of you, you're going to focus on how many people responded positively to you. And if out of 10 people, 2 people responded positively, you'll say, generally, I don't think people like me. But if you're not aware of the fact that the other 8 people, they didn't respond positively because they were reserved or constrained, or they were insecure because your presence made them feel inadequate, you're going to assume that that's what they think of you, not what they think of themselves. And it's a fine balance to strike, because then you've got to decide, well, if people feel intimidated by me, do I want to change something about myself so they're less intimidated? Or do I understand that the reason for them feeling intimidated is something that I don't really care about, because I can't go and save everyone or fix everyone or try to convince everyone that they shouldn't be intimidated by me. I just have to recognize that perhaps they're just not passionate about what it is that I'm passionate about. And then trust that when you continue doing what you believe there's value in, people who find value in it will be attracted to you. It's not the law of attraction. Please. The law of attraction is crap. It is simple logic. If I'm into a specific hobby, if I like painting, I'm not going to be able to find people who are interested in painting if I'm going to go to a sports event. Because the only time I'm going to know who likes painting at a sports event is if I talk to every person to find out if they like painting or not. That's a very tedious and onerous way to go about trying to find your tribe. So if I like painting, I need to frequent spaces and hobby shops and places that would typically involve painting, because other people who are also interested in painting would be in those spaces. That way, I'll know easily how to identify who it is that shares a common interest with me. And the same thing is true about relationships. The same thing is true about social structures, about being more effective at what you do. Because if you don't realize these simple things about what it is that's consuming your headspace, about what you're afraid of and what you think others think of you and what you think you have to do or else people are going to take advantage of you and all of that, the moment you're in that defensive space, you're automatically preempting. And when you're preempting, it means that you are projecting your past experiences on what is the potential outcomes of what it is that you're facing in front of you right now. That's how you lose the present moment. You project into the future what it is that you think you need to prepare yourself for. And all of that is informed by things that happened in the past that you don't fully understand yet. Can you see how we complicate life? We complicate life because we try too hard. We complicate life because we don't trust ourselves to figure things out. We don't trust ourselves to figure things out because we became comfortable or confident about the fact that when we had a method or a solution, things worked out. So then we get into this headspace of believing that I must be prepared. I must have a method. I must have a solution. I must have a strategy. I must have this to-do list and task list and this schedule and this plan that I have to work with to be able to overcome what it is that I think might lie ahead. No. Life is like a practical joke. But before I tell you about the practical joke, which I think I did touch on before, but it's worth revisiting, I believe the wisdom in something I heard a while back is really, really true, in that when you travel, you should plan to the nth degree, but then go with the flow, right? And that means that you must be informed, you must have an understanding of what you're getting into, but you must go with the flow in responding to what opportunities and what disruptions occur in the moment. And the reason for that is because you trust that your understanding of what you're dealing with is sufficient to help you to navigate the eventualities that arise that are out of your control. And if you treat life that way, it goes a whole lot better, because then you look for wisdom, you look for insight, you look for understanding, and you trust that when something comes up, you'll either know how you want to navigate it, or if you don't, you'll know how to go about figuring it out so that you can navigate it effectively. And that's the part that most people have lost sight of, because we're conditioned from a very young age that you must know, you must be competent, you must be knowledgeable, you must have qualifications and all sorts of nonsense before you will be taken seriously. And that's why we lack critical thinkers these days, because everyone's trying to have a pre-made answer. They're trying to have a solution ready that they can throw at someone because that will keep them relevant. You have impact, and your impact that you have is about who you are to someone else. It's not about what you do or what qualifications you have or what resources you have or what authority you have. If someone worships authority, they're going to worship you only as long as you have authority. If someone values credibility, integrity, substance, authenticity, it doesn't matter whether you have authority or not. They'll value you if you embody those attributes. And if you don't know how to achieve that, then that is the first indicator that you're distracted. You're distracted by what you need others to think of you or what you think others think of you. And you don't have a focus or an understanding or an awareness of what you think of yourself and why. The why is always more important than what and how. I think it was Emerson, I can't remember for sure, but I think it was Emerson that said something to the effect that the person who knows how will always have a job, but the person who knows why will always be his boss. Why? Because when you know why something is important, you realize the value that it has and how that value fits into the value proposition that others are going to want. If you don't understand why, you'll keep doing the how until the why changes and your how, your method, your skill becomes redundant. That's what happens in relationships as well. It's the same thing. If you're focused on how you need to romance your partner and you constantly fixate on just being the best you can at romancing them in that way, when they outgrow that or that becomes tired, because we need spontaneity, we need something that's more fresh and not monotonous and laborious and predictable. As humans, we need that. We need that variety. So if you lose sight of the fact that you're lacking in variety and your partner outgrows what it is that always worked before, you're going to think that you're growing apart, that you're outgrowing each other, that you're no longer compatible. Meanwhile, you stagnated while your partner grew. And that's the sad part, is that when we don't realize what impact we have, we keep chasing on ensuring that people are going to be seeing us as relevant, as significant, as worthy of having around, and all of those things. And we're not going to realize who we are in all of that. We're only going to be focused on who we need to be so that we don't become invisible. Imagine going through your whole life trying not to be invisible. And then you're laying in your deathbed and you look back and you think, I never had a chance to show the world who I am. How sad would that be? Because that's what we do. I think the greatest deathbed regrets is exactly that, is realizing that we never truly gave those around us an opportunity to experience who we truly are, because we were so focused on responsibility and the burden of life and making ends meet and all of those things, and we never ever thought about the quality of life. We get distracted by standard of living, we get distracted by necessity and essentials and things like that, and we exhaust ourselves in providing and doing those things to the point where we forget why we're doing it. We're doing it because we wanted a good quality of life for the people around us, not because we wanted to be relevant. You will automatically be relevant when you realize what impact you have, because you'll be able to put that to greater effect. And to start realizing what impact you have to be more interested in how someone is receiving you relative to what you're intending, rather than whether they like you or not. Because if you're going to look at every person's reaction to you and you're going to interpret that as, do they like me or don't they like me? Do they approve or do they disapprove? You're not going to see why it is that what's important to you, they're not connecting with. Or maybe what's important to them, you're not connecting with. And that's how you end up just talking past each other. You know, like they say, two ships passing silently in the night. They don't even know that they're there. That's what happens, is that you become so fixated on who you need to be accepted as that you don't realize that in your desperation to be accepted that way, you drive people around you absolutely insane, because you keep shutting them down when they're trying to also be seen and heard. And then some clever kid comes along and says, my parents are toxic, and I need to cut ties with these family members because they are so toxic, and everyone is toxic, and everyone is narcissistic, and everyone's bipolar, and everyone's ADHD these days. We've become pretty stupid when it comes to understanding the human condition. And I don't mean pretty stupid as a euphemism. I mean absolutely daft. We've focused on biology, and we've focused on tokens of importance, and we've focused on trinkets and symbolism and pronouns, and we've lost sight of the human. And that's what happens, again, when you lose sight of the fact that you have impact. When you have impact and you are the more dominant one for reasons that are just part of the balance of nature, like a parent having more impact on a child rather than the other way around. If you don't realize what impact you have, You'll be so busy beating yourself up and self-loathing and trying to drink yourself into oblivion and trying to avoid the emotional themes that play in your mind when in the middle of the night. You'll be so busy fixating on how that's all affecting you that you won't realize that there are people around you that are negatively impacted by your absence or by your oblivious presence. You have impact. If there's one thing you need to realize is that you have impact. And it's the impact you have that shapes your life more than what it is you think others think of you. So if ever there was a pursuit that we should all have in life, it is to be very finely tuned into what impact do we want to have rather than how do we want others to see us. You know, it's the kind of thing, parenting is a good example of this. And I've always said that if you're into instant gratification, parenting is not for you. Because parenting is anything but instant gratification. Parenting is about having good reason to understand and believe what is important, even if your child disagrees with it. And then making sure that you don't allow them to be flippant about what is important in life, while at the same time striking a balance to nurture the spirit within them. Parenting is not for wimps, and it's not for self-indulgent egotists either. Parenting is for people who want to impart wisdom to the ones they bring into this world. And if you believe you don't have wisdom to impart, if you believe that you're not good enough, if you have all of the self-loathing narratives going on in your head, and you think you're going to be able to show the world how it's done because you're going to have your own kids and you're going to raise them the way you think people should raise their kids, you're looking for trouble and you're going to destroy innocent lives. Deal with your demons, because your demons are what prevent you from seeing the impact you have, because it distracts you inwardly about everything you loathe about yourself, everything you're judging about what you got wrong, what you lost out on, what you didn't get in life, and all of those things. You need to rise above that. And you're not going to rise above that if you're going to be looking for answers in other people's faces. You have to find the answers inside yourself. Understand what drives you, why it is that you feel the way you do. If there's something that you believe is inadequate about yourself, see why it's inadequate. See whether it is inadequate in the first place or not. What are you comparing it to? What standard drives your perspective of whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing? What's your frame of reference about life? It is your parents as a starting point. It doesn't have to be your parents as an ending point. And be careful how you approach that. Because everyone thinks that they can do better than the people that came before them. Yet, look at the state of the world. Look at the state of homes, of families, of social structures. Look at the state of mental health. Everyone knows so much about mental health these days, and we've got manuals and volumes and a DSM and all that nonsense that tells us how we must diagnose each other. But yet we don't understand each other. We need to reclaim our sanity. We need to reclaim common sense. We need to reclaim logic, critical thinking. We need to reclaim agency. We need to get to a point where we realize that we are responsible for the impact that we have on others. And when we understand why we have that impact, we then take accountability for whether we choose to do something about it or not. We take accountability for that. We don't blame them for us not being influential enough. We take accountability for understanding why it is that it might just not be feasible for us to change ourselves in such a way that to have that impact, because the cost of changing ourselves to have that impact is going to be too great because of how it's going to deplete who we are, or how it's going to distract us from what we believe is important about life. And all of that talks to realizing who you are and what impact you have. And again, you are not going to see that in someone else's face, in someone else's reaction to you. You are only going to see that when you know what impact you hope to have versus how it's being received and what you want to do about that. Mindfulness, the absence of distraction. Not meditation, not yoga, not any of these other new age practices. It's simply the absence of distraction. And I was saying about life being a practical joke, and I touched on this before, but like I said, let's finish off on this point. Life is like a practical joke because in the middle of a practical joke being played on you, you get flustered, you get scared, horrified, angry, whatever it is. And the moment you realize it was a practical joke and it wasn't the reality, what happens? You don't have to go through 21 days of reminding yourself about why it was a practical joke and that's why you should be okay. It's the realization that it isn't real, that it wasn't the way you thought it was playing out, that it wasn't intended to harm. It's that realization in that split second when you realize it and you look around you and you see, okay, it was a joke. And the pressure and the impact and the ferocity of it and everything else just suddenly dissipates because you realized it wasn't what you thought it was. That's what life is about. You look back and you think you've got toxic parents, or you think you've got toxic relationships and people are narcissists and all of that. The impact that has on you, what you think it was the reasons for it being directed at you, projected on you, whatever it was. When you realize what was going on their side, automatically you'll be able to understand why it is that it wasn't because of what they thought of you. It's because of what they were grappling with in themselves. When we take our demons and use it as justification to project our anger and our frustration and our needy emotional expectations on others, when we do that because of our demons, we become oppressors. And when we become oppressors, we must not be surprised when the people around us respond like victims. So, please, take a moment to consider what impact you have. Or not just what impact you have. Just take a moment to realize that you have had impact all your life. And when you start realizing what impact you've had all your life, you might get that switch in realization like the practical joke. You'll get that new perspective about, that's why that played out the way it did. That's why they reacted the way they did. That's why they were so hurt by what I said. Not because they were being sensitive or whatever. It's because you were important to them. I'm Zaid Ismail. I hope that was of value. Take care, and I look forward to your criticism and your feedback about this. Thanks.